Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. First of all, thanks for giving me a little bit extra time. I got out here pretty late in the evening into Boise, Idaho, and I spent much of the plane ride today just thinking about the pattern we came out of and the one we're in now. And the reason I was thinking a lot about it is because it took us about 50 days to kind of get through the previous block that was over the west, and that's what you've been looking at here. We saw throughout much of September and then really in October deeper troughs that were north of Hawaii that built into larger ridges that kind of anchored in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, even at times we had a Rex block here. And this sent quite a bit of colder air off to the east. So this pattern really started around the beginning of September and didn't really break down to around the 23rd of October. It was with us for a while. And I'm asking that question because I want to know how long is the new pattern we're in going to last. We're going to try to get to an answer to that in just a second here. But first of all, I'll just give you some stats here since we are at the kind of end of a month. I just wanted to show you that first 3 weeks of October really showed the Rex block drying things out in the west and Pacific Northwest. We were above average in parts of Arizona and New Mexico, but then much of the central United States has been extremely dry. We've been covering the drought issues on the Mississippi River here because of this. And along the East Coast, things were wetter at times, but we did see longer stretches of dry weather. We're in one right now along the East Coast as well. But the temperature pattern is just split. You split the country around the 100th meridian, and you can see that to the east where those troughs were sitting, we were much colder than normal, especially right along the Appalachian Mountains here. Whereas the west and the Pacific Northwest were setting all-time warmest 3-week time periods at the beginning of the month of October. Okay, so the answer to the question starts with a look at the MJO. Now we know that the MJO and La Niña are kind of intricately related, and it would be the same if there was an El Nino signal. But what we had coming out of September was very weak MJO signal, and even when it popped out into phase 4 and 5, it didn't do so with much effort. It wasn't really until we got this into phase 6 that we saw some higher amplitude, and it's moving through phase 7, and right now there is a projection for it to come right back around to phase 6 throughout the month of November. And this is important for us to just once again diagnose what these two phases mean historically when the MJO spends a lot of time there. It is quite common to have the MJO in the month of November be in phase 6 when there is a La Niña. And so the two things I want you to see again are that we tend to get troughs of low pressure over Japan and then troughs of low pressure that sit here in the Gulf of Alaska. And that's where the pattern really becomes established. Now, we can also, when we're in MJO phase 6, get larger ridges that can push over Europe and bring in quite a bit of heat. And we've seen that factor as well. But what I want you to understand is that we often get very high momentum in the Pacific jet stream. In other words, a lot of westward momentum just pulling through the Pacific and driving systems into parts of the Northwest, and then they come across the United States. With ridging in the midsection of the country, that does tend to open up the midsection in eastern United States to some warmth at times, and this can also, as this ridge moves around, really help out with the kind of return of some Gulf moisture, all things we're going to be seeing here in the near term. So what typically happens is this: when we saw the MJO really jump out into phase 6, and now it's in phase 7, but when it really made that jump out was the 22nd of October through about the 28th. So in other words, we're getting a lot of rising motion here. And what this does is it tends to send its momentum out toward Japan. So if you can just imagine, there's a lot of rising motion here. It just has to come out into the Pacific. And so we tend to get troughs of low pressure here, a ridge that runs over the Aleutian Islands, and then a trough that comes into the Pacific Northwest. We actually saw, in addition to that, almost a little bit of a subtropical component of the jet showing up here, but mainly this was driven by deeper troughs that were diving out of the Pacific Northwest into the Central Plains. So we just look for this particular spot in the month of November to give us an extended jet. That's kind of how this all relates. And remember, this is just what carries the systems across the Pacific and then pulls them into the United States. This is not a setup for blocking in the United States. It's very much open and flowing. So we look now over the next 15 days and say, are we going to keep this same MJO signal, which again, driven by the trade winds that are in this La Niña? And overall, you probably see a very familiar picture here. If I just kind of draw a line right down the middle, we see that right now, while we're in phase 7, there's a bit of a weaker signal, but we go right back over to strong easterlies here, westerly wind bursts coming out of the Indian Ocean. So that means we're coming in like this, coming over like that, and that's a lot of phase 6. So we expect through the beginning of this month to transition back out of phase 7 back over to phase 6 as we go forward. Now, what this has done is in the last week with that flow pattern, remember, it came in like this, and then we had the piece that came up like that, is that we were able to draw on quite a bit of Gulf moisture, and from Texas into Oklahoma, stretching through pockets of the Mid-South, but into Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. This was an area that saw open Gulf moisture transport. We had a frontal boundary that lingered, one system that rolled over the top of it, a second system yesterday and today that rolled over this, and as a result, it's been wetter here. Now, places that have been missed, we have yet to deliver moisture to California. That's going to change. We have yet to really get good moisture back into parts of central and western Kansas, parts of Nebraska and Colorado, and here into the Dakotas. That is going to change. And these systems have really pulled pretty quickly to the north, leaving much of the East Coast dry, especially from parts of, really starting in Georgia, but getting up here into parts of the Mid-Atlantic. That's going to change as well. So this whole pattern shift is really going to bring about quite a bit of shift overall. I'm going to show it to you here. So first of all, through October 20th, this is where our soil moisture values landed. But with the recent rains we just saw, some of that's changed a bit. Here's the holes where we still have to fill in, right? From Kansas through the Dakotas, getting over into parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin. We're going to do that soon. Better moisture fell in this area today. It probably ruined some of the kids' trick-or-treating. I know my nephew over here in Indianapolis went out. I think he was dressed up as Ed Carpenter, IndyCar racer. He was over here. He's 4, having a great time. Poured milk all over his head. Okay, sorry about that. But anyways, they got some rain in this area. So we're going to see this pattern really start to shift around here, and I really want to take a look at it. Okay, first of all, what's the Mississippi up to? Let's go have a quick look at Memphis. So as this kind of shows up here, notice we're still, about 12, 13 feet below low stage. But the overall river, it's up about 2.5, almost 3 feet. So some of that moisture is starting to percolate into the river. But again, remember, we want a slow recovery of that river. We don't want to have the flooding that would just bring it right back up very quickly. So we'll just keep updating you on what's going on in the Mississippi here. Now, stretching this back a little further, those areas that we're going to be seeing relief are in some long-standing drought. So we brought moisture into this area today, but much more is needed here and certainly into California. And each of these systems that's coming through is going to target the Pacific Northwest. So with that all as a backdrop, knowing that La Niña, MJO Phase 6 seems to be where the dominant teleconnection is, I wasn't surprised when I saw this coming out of today's newest ECMWF long-range outlook. It's suggesting that over the next 30 days, we tend to have more troughs coming around the Japanese islands here. And then there tends to be a little bit of ridging here, and then troughs coming to the northwest. We also get a little bit of sense of ridging in this area. Can you kind of see that there? Maybe a little bit over Europe too. And what this will end up doing is keeping much of the eastern U.S. a little more mild, also keeping Europe a bit mild in the near term. But systems will be flowing into the United States and running across the country very freely here. If we zoom into the United States view, there we go, and flip this over to a 30-day precip outlook from November 10 to December 10, you can see the potential impact of that ridge. Not much change from my analysis on Thursday. There could be drier risks in here. Not dry, but drier, but systems still coming into the west and probably following a track from maybe a Colorado low or one that forms out of Wyoming and tracks over the Great Lakes and moves in this direction. I think we're going to see quite a bit of that going forward. What's good about this is that we're also getting buy-in from the CPC and NOAA. Zoom back out here. Their week 3, week 4 precipitation outlook is very similar to the European model, and therefore it just gives me a little more confidence that the analysis we're doing makes the most sense. All right. Now, right now, today, this is what our jet stream looks like in the evening here on Monday. And there again, you can see it. One trough coming off of Japan, the ridge in the Aleutian Islands, another trough coming into the Pacific Northwest. There's even one that's kind of, he's got this interesting tilt to it, this forward tilt that's coming out of parts of Texas with very strong winds to the south. But for me personally today, it was the really strong winds going over Idaho that could have been a problem. I was looking at it here when I landed on satellite. Let me take you back to before the sunset right there. So we flew from Chicago over to Seattle, and normally we'd probably take a path something like this. But the pilot came on and made an announcement they're going to be about 15 minutes late because they did not want to fly over the mountains in Idaho and Montana due to turbulence. What was neat about that is you can actually see the strong winds. We even had wind advisories out here today, creating all of these gravity waves coming off the mountains. And so instead we were a little bit late, but the flight in to Seattle avoided this. We went south over the Snake River Valley and then back up to Seattle. So just thought I'd point that out to you, kind of a neat bit of science being used by the pilots, I guess. Next, this is the low that's finally exiting. That's the one that over the last 3 days spread more rain from parts of the Red River Valley of the south through the eastern Corn Belt, and it was also the one that delivered the severe weather down here in parts of southern Mississippi. Several tornadoes reported down there over the weekend. So this is our most recent rain, and all the action is going to resume right here, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at where this next week's forecast is going to go. There's a possibility that here, like in the Willamette Valley, pushing up toward the Cascades, that at the higher elevations we could be easily picking up between 3 and 6 plus inches of liquid equivalent. A lot of that will come in snow. We are seeing the first decent moisture returning to northern California, the Sierra Nevada, and even getting into the northern Rockies and central Rockies. What I'm really impressed with is the model's consistency in pulling back enough moisture to return it to parts of Kansas, dry parts of Nebraska, and then spreading rain over what has been very dry conditions in parts of Iowa, Minnesota, and parts of Wisconsin. So the models have been consistent here, and the WPC, that's NOAA, their forecast for the next 7 days right now has got this section of Kansas picking up well over 2 inches of rainfall out of this. So I like to see the consistent performance in the models. It did make sense that we were going to draw the moisture back far enough given how deep this trough is going to go in the west. And let's go ahead and take a look at some of the high-res models to see where it's all going to be. So I'm going to start you off at 10 p.m. on Monday night. That was when I was recording. One system exiting, the next one coming in. Ready? So as we play through the overnight hours and get you to Tuesday morning, when probably a lot of you are going to see this, scattered showers in New England. But here's the depth of that trough pulling moisture in. And you can already see that by early in the morning on Tuesday, it's in northern California. It's snow into parts of Oregon, stretches through parts of the Columbia Basin. And then as we play this forward throughout the afternoon and evening hours, that trough will push moisture in the form of snow over the Sierra Nevada, stretch up here into parts of eastern Oregon, a place that desperately needs it. Remember, we looked at those reservoirs a couple weeks ago. Several of them are empty, so early season snowpack is great. And then once we get into the overnight hours on Tuesday and play through Wednesday, that low tries to move its way through Idaho, possibly bringing in some snow showers right where I am right now. And then eventually taking this system straight through Alberta and on into Saskatchewan. That system's going to very quickly run to the north. See it there? So from here, I want to go take a look at the pattern, all right? Because I'm interested in how many more of these troughs are coming in. So there's the system we've already seen. There's the ridge off to the east. That's going to be quite warm underneath that. And then what we're going to see is that through Thursday, the lead wave goes out. The deeper wave, this is the one I just told you about, this wave dives down into Southern California. And what I like about it is that it attempts to close off, gets cut off from the flow. Remember us talking about that on Thursday? If we can close this off, it's going to do a better job at returning that moisture back into the plains, places that really need this rainfall. While that low is moving across the country late this week, and there will be a severe weather threat with it, I'm also going to watch for this wave break event that might cut off this low right here, just north of the Greater Antilles. Because what we're seeing is through the weekend, as this wave really kind of inflects, in other words, it goes from being positively tilted to negatively tilted and sweeps through the United States, we're going to watch to see how the moisture from this one gets pulled north around this high, see it right there, and then we're going to watch our next big trough come into the Pacific Northwest. Now, as I said, that lead wave, this guy right here, when it's coming out of the southwest, is increasing the risk on Thursday into Friday, and then again on, Thursday into Friday, and then Friday into Saturday for severe storms. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. This is the region we're keeping an eye on late this week. Use the Storm Prediction Center site to get the latest. They're the best in the business at this. So let's go put it all together with the European model. European model still outperforming the GFS, so I'm going to focus on just one model tonight. So we've seen through the day on Wednesday right there. So lead low is pulling through eastern Montana into southern Saskatchewan. The heaviest snows will be on the backside. The deeper trough is still diving into California. So you're going to see the heaviest snow band is going to stretch from this part of Montana right through here into the Canadian prairie. While that's all happening, that main trough is digging down deeper, some snow in Wyoming, parts of Colorado and Utah. What we're going to watch for is on Thursday evening, right here. This might be when the low jumps out into the plains and we get some least cyclogenesis in Colorado. But given that there's a high here, the flow will be coming around this, just like that, delivering moisture pretty far to the west. Now later this week, we're going to look exactly where those dew point temperatures make it. But today, we see that in the overnight hours, we're going to have to watch for severe storms in this part of Nebraska, Kansas, getting down into the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. Could be scattered storms into Texas. Snow coming into Colorado, highly likely in this. We'll look at the probabilities in a moment. So that then pulls through early Friday morning. This is Friday afternoon and evening. So that's a good rainfall event coming into Kansas, but it stretches down into Texas. And then this low, remember how I told you about the tilt pulls negative and starts to yank this north? It does bring heavier rains from Missouri all the way down to eastern Texas, but the system gets yanked through Illinois and pulled right up through the Great Lakes by Sunday. It's also at that point that we see this large low that's sitting over the Bahamas possibly work its way in and deliver some moisture into the coastal regions of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Now, while all that's happening, I hope you didn't miss it, there's another big low right here on Sunday, and that one dives into the northwest. Now, we don't have the details on this just yet, but at this point, it looks like it's going to possibly merge somewhere into Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, and we'll have a whole new set of issues to be talking about early next week. The pattern is open, and it is moving, and this is what we end up getting out of it. Now, I mentioned some snow in there. Since we've already looked at total precip, let's go look at snow. So if we play this all the way out through the first system, we'll stop it right there. That's through Friday, early Friday morning. There's our heaviest band of snow. We see that the northern Rockies and the Cascades, some places picking up 6 to 12 inches, but right down here into Oregon and into the Sierra Nevada, there are some places that will get over a foot of snow already. We then see the second round coming in right here, and that's the big push of snow. Now, it's out there about a week, but it's important to see that it is attempting to really pull that deeper trough and colder air and strong onshore flow, packing up the Sierra Nevada, packing up the Cascades in the northern and central Rockies. So this could be a significant snowfall event over here later this week into the weekend. Now, the current operational run attempts to drag some snow behind the second system through the Dakotas into northern Minnesota. This is highly uncertain because we're banking on the low emerging here and then racing off in this direction with plenty of cold air to the north to tap in. That low has to be here for this snow swath to exist there, and we just don't yet have this pinned down. The ensembles are a bit all over the place with where that third low could be. So let's look at the probabilities. This is using the 12Z run from Monday. What you're looking at here is the probability of getting 3 inches of snow. If we step that up to 6 inches of snow in the next 10 days, you can see that we still see chances in this area, but they start to fade once we get a better idea on where that low, they'll start to improve once we get a better idea on where that low is going to be. How much in the mountains? Well, that's the probability of getting 12 inches, and here's 18. So we're really going to start to stack up some snow here in our western mountain ranges, which we desperately need to get going early this year. By the time we get out there to November 10, the pattern is still doing what it's doing, right? You can see there's a trough over here by Japan. There's another one coming into the northwest, and the flow is just going to continue to press systems across the northern tier of the United States. So they enter here, track through the midsection of the country, and the reason why we see drier conditions here is because there could be some ridging, and therefore we just have limited chances at widespread heavy rainfall. It's more of the thunderstorm environment here as we get to this point in the month of November. That's your week 2 precip forecast. Let's talk about temperatures before we stretch this out to a global perspective. Tuesday, the 1st, is going to be an absolute scorcher in the north central plains and the upper Midwest and northern plains. Some places here might be 30 degrees warmer than normal. As we go from Tuesday into Wednesday, the warmth spreads farther to the east, as you can see, while the deeper trough settles into the west by Thursday, getting into Friday, and then into Saturday. Now, remember, this is when the low is ejecting in the plain, so this is going to come, we'll have to see where that front is, but we're going to see the cooler air arriving after the main front clears through this area. But very warm start to the weekend in the northeast, stretching back to the eastern Corn Belt, and same thing here on Sunday. How long does the pattern stay like that? Well, it's kind of like what we talked about at the beginning. It's set up to stay like that for a while. So if we look at this 5-day sliding window of temperatures, you see that the coldest air stays anchored in the west. It stays anchored from British Columbia through Alberta and Saskatchewan. And we see more warmer days through the middle part of the month across the eastern half of the country. But there will be some pretty good cold air invasions, I guess I could call them, coming out of the Canadian Prairie into the northern plains as we work our way into that second week of November and then eventually into the middle of the month. So we'll watch out for that carefully. Now, bigger picture things again as we wrap this up. La Niña. Let's keep talking about it. Still continuing to see almost the same strength. It is very strong for this late in October going into November. And just to bring you up on the latest information, because with the start of a new month, we do get all new long-range information, so that'll be coming out late this week and weekend. We'd still remember that the Columbia University forecast for the INSO region just maintains La Niña through the start of winter, but starts to see that fade once we begin the new year. And their current projections give a pretty good chance at seeing maybe even weak El Nino conditions showing up by the time we get into next summer. So we'll have to watch for how quickly this transitions. But the good news is when I see this kind of transition being forecast, it tells me that the drought picture across the country will likely be shrinking in its area with time as we go through winter and into spring. This is a good setup for that. Now let's talk about South America, because I was looking on satellite today. Take a look at this. Let's go back to where the sun was up. Look at the extent of this front that is clearing through southern Brazil, Paraguay, into Bolivia, right here into this section of central Brazil. And it's moving. And it's going to move its way all the way north of the Amazon. And as it cleared through Argentina last night, I was very curious if we had a frost event. Now, I spent some time in the hotel looking at all of these locations, and I did not see frost over in Buenos Aires. I came over here to this one called Santa Rosa, and what I saw here was that that's the zero line, and you can see that we got very close to it. So I'm going to imagine that there was some patchy frost. Oops, I apologize. I actually closed it. There was some patchy frost right in through this area and possibly bordering on Buenos Aires, but I did not see it farther to the north. In other words, it got cold, but I don't think there was any frost damage. Now, after that front clears, look how dry things are going to be. Very dry. And so we continue to build our drought issues into parts of southern Brazil and Argentina. But the drier conditions up here, I imagine this is going to help them just continue on their fast planting pace. We're matching last year's pace. We're about 20% above the 5-year average. And this is just for Mato Grosso, but they're moving there. So from here, I do want to show you one other thing. Let's go back to here, and let's flip this over to South America. There we go. You can see that the long-range outlook from November 10 to December 10 still anchors the driest conditions where it's been very dry along the Paraná River Basin, but decent rains farther to the north. From there, I just want to give you a couple of other global updates. First, Australia. This is how they're going to finish October. 4 to 8 inches of surplus rainfall in parts of South Australia, but really into Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. Very, very, very wet. There was even some reported hail in Western Australia this past weekend that hit some of the wheat crop here pretty hard. So this is one of the wettest Octobers on record. I'll have to get the official statistics once it's done and they've got them compiled. But over the next 10 days, there is still more rain coming into the east coast here, and that's going to continue to cause flooding on their main rivers like the Darling and the River Murray down here. So we'll watch for that too. And finally, I do want to mention what's going on in Europe. We talked about the big ridge that's over Europe, very warm conditions there right now. But I still have concern that this pattern we're going into this winter may lead to a lot of North Atlantic blocking. And some of the other global models are kind of helping me with that reasoning. I don't often use the Canadian seasonal model called CANSIPS, but if I had to draw this by hand, what I thought this winter would look like, this is what I would draw for the temperature anomalies. We start off with La Niña, tends to be colder in through here. If we get cold air coming through here, we tend to ridge way up into Greenland and parts of Iceland, and that tends to dip troughs across parts of Europe. So I'm just concerned that we could have cold signals across Europe this winter, which would be very detrimental given kind of the global demand we could have on energy resources given the supply issues. So I just want to bring that to your attention. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for giving me a little extra time tonight. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.